Hey guys, welcome back. In the last lesson, seller appointments, we briefly went over contracts. This lesson, we're going to dive deep into contracts and different documents that you're most likely going to find in the closing process. At the end of this lesson, you should have a clear understanding of contracts, be able to explain it well to the seller, and really navigate your way through the closing process when it comes to title documents. The first document that we're going to review is the seller net sheet, and then we're going to go into the TREC 1-4 contract. If you can fill out a TREC 1-4 contract, you can fill out damn near any contract, okay? And with the TREC 1-4, we're going to go over the two most common addendums, the HOA and the lead-based paint addendum. And we're also going to go over an amendment. And think about an amendment like the Constitution, okay? Amend means to change. So if you're using an amendment, you're changing the contract. And if you're using an addendum, you're adding to the contract. You see the first two letters, ADD, and addendum in lead-based paint. I am also going to provide you with a 4-page contract, just a standard contract. I would highly recommend using the TREC though, but if you absolutely need to, I will provide you with the other contract as well. And then, God forbid, if we get the property locked up at too high of a price, we're going to be going over the release of earnest money and the termination. But guess what? We learned how to run ARV and estimate our rehab properly and give offers at the right price. So we're not going to have that issue. So we're going to be going over that memorandum and how to file the memorandum with the county and how that protects you. And then after we file the memorandum at that point, so we've got the property under contract, we've built great rapport with the seller, okay? So at this point, we're marketing the property, we're getting investors involved, and we're starting to get bids and offers on the property, okay? And at that point, we're either going to assign the contract or we're gonna double close. If you're double closing, then you're probably just gonna use the same contract again, right? But if you're using an assignment, then we're gonna go over the assignment of contract, as well as a JV contract, just in case you either are disposing a property for another acquisitions agent or you're in need of a dispositions agent for your property. We're going to go over JV contracts. And then as an added bonus, I threw in some common title documents that you would see, like the survey and an elevation certificate and an inspection report. We're not going to go over those too in depth, but they are in the Google Drive for your review, and feel free to look over those. And if you have any questions, do not hesitate to reach out. So we're going to start with the seller's net sheet. This is going to give the seller an estimate of what to expect in proceeds at closing. So when you're sitting down, possibly at an appointment with the seller, either on the phone or in person, and the seller wants to get an idea of what their take home is going to be, you might have to reverse engineer these numbers with them, right? So we start off with our contracted sales price or our negotiated sales price. So let's just say it's $100,000, okay? And then maybe they have a mortgage. So then you deduct from their mortgage, or if they have any additional liens out against the property, then you would deduct all those liens, okay? And then what I like to do here is if they were selling on market, they would have to pay broker's fees, other title fees possibly, and just miscellaneous fees might add up during the closing process that the seller might have to eat. So what I do is I line item all these fees, and you write down all those numbers, right? And then what I would do in front of the seller is cross out in front of them. But guess what? When you sell to us, we take care of those fees. The buyer takes care of those fees. So we cross them out in front of them and then present the document back and say, so here's what your estimated proceeds could be at closing, right? Please remember, all figures are considered to be estimates and not considered final quotes. Before closing, title is going to send out a preliminary HUD, and final numbers may vary significantly from what's listed here because we don't have a title search back and we're not promising these numbers, okay? So you went through the seller net sheet and the seller was liking what they saw, and at that point they were ready to sign the contract. We're going to pick out which contract we're using. For this example, we're going to go over the TREC contract in depth. So the first thing that we're going to want to do when we're filling out our contract is pull up our contract, whether we're writing it out in person or typing it on the computer. And then what we're going to want to do is pull up the county appraisal district, the county appraisal district where the home is located. Okay, so if it's in Montgomery County, Harris County. Okay. So for this example, we're going to use the Two Alder property. This property is located in Montgomery County. So we pulled up MCAD. I typed in the street address and we're going to go ahead and search. There it is. Okay. Once we have the county appraisal district pulled up, we're looking for a couple specific things. We're going to be looking for the owner of the property and the property's legal description. You'll see here the owner is a Breckenridge Property Fund 2016 LLC. Here's the street address, Two Alder Place. But the legal description is Woodlands Village, Grogan's Mills, Section 5, Block 2, Lot 10. Okay, so if you're not familiar with legal description and property address, think about it like this. When you're born, you are given a name. My name is Alexis Skeen. The government gives you a social security number. Think of your property address as your name and your legal description as your social security number. So when you're sending a piece of mail, you're not going to send to Alexis Skeen at Woodlands Village, Grogan's Mills, Section 5, Block 2, Lot 10. No, you're going to send it to Alexis Skeen at Two Alder Place, Spring, Texas. But after we've found the owner and the legal description, the two pieces of information we're looking for, we're going to pull up our contract. So you'll see here, the first line says, the parties to this contract are seller and buyer. Seller agrees to sell and convey to buyer, and buyer agrees to buy from seller the property defined below. The first blank is the seller, and you can find the name of the owner in the county appraisal district, or if you're a licensed agent using the HAR MLS, you can find this information in realist tax, or if it's a question, you can put owner of record. All right, section 2, property. The land improvements and accessories are collectively referred to as the property. Property. A, land. So this is where we enter the legal description and the property address.
Well, I was so rudely interrupted inside, so we had to move into the garage. Sorry for that. Let's go back to HCAD and look at the legal description. Again, Woodlands Village, Grogan Mills, Section 5, Block 2, Lot 10. So you would enter that in just like that into the contract. What I like to do is copy the legal description and then paste it into the contract right here, and then fill in the lot and block. So Lot 10, Block 2, the full legal description, in the city of Spring, in the county of Montgomery, Texas, known as, and this is where you would put the property address, Two Alder Place. This area is commonly referred to as the Woodlands. So here it would actually be the Woodlands, Texas 77380. All right, so we've got the parties to the contract, got the property address taken care of. So now we're going to move into some of our price terms. We're going to talk about the sales price, how much earnest money you're going to be putting down, the option fee, how much time you're going to have in option, okay, and what title company you're going to choose. Starting with price, sales price. A, cash portion of sales price payable to buyer at closing, blank. So let's pretend that we're purchasing this property for $100,000. We put $100,000 in this first blank. That's cash. Hard money also is considered cash for this contract, okay? So hard money, private money, or cash go here. So $100,000, you put it there. If you were doing a VA, USDA, FHA, conventional loan, then you would put it in B. The sum of all financing described. So third-party financing, you would put how much you were buying it for there. So if you're buying it for $100,000 with a VA loan, you would put it right there. But we're not, we're purchasing property cash. So we're gonna be using the A and C, okay? In section A, we're gonna be putting $100,000. And then in C, we would again be putting how much we're purchasing the property for. So it would be $100,000 again. So A would say $100,000 and C would say $100,000. So in section 5, we're going to be talking about our earnest money and our option period and termination. Well, section 5 says, A, delivery of earnest money and option fee. Within 3 days after the effective date, buyer must deliver to blank as escrow agent at blank money. How much money? Blank money. As earnest money and blank money as option money. The earnest money and option money shall be made payable to escrow agent and may be paid separately or combined in a single payment. So what does all that mean? Let's go back over it again. So within 3 days after the effective date of the contract, so 3 days after this agreement is signed, the buyer, you, must deliver to blank as escrow agent. So you would contact your local title company that you're going with and ask who the escrow agent is. And you would put their name down, okay? So your escrow officer. So you, the buyer, must deliver to the escrow officer at this title company that we're referencing, Patent Title in Kingwood. It's Kimberly Kirsch, okay, as escrow agent at Patent Title, Kingwood, and then the property address for the title company. Part 2, $, blank as earnest money and blank as option fee. So the amount of earnest money that you're going to pay goes here. Generally, earnest money is 1% of the sales price of the contract. If we were purchasing this property for $100,000, the general rule would be you'd put $1,000 down in earnest money. If you're purchasing it for $300,000, $3,000 in earnest money. However, that's just a general commonality. That is not rule and that is not law, okay? So you don't have to put 1% down. You can put more down or you can put less. Here, I would say if you're wholesaling deals, I would try to get in for less. So we like to stick to $500 or less. So what earnest money is basically saying that you're putting your money where your mouth is. And in Texas, when you are dealing with contracts, you have to give consideration. In this contract, it's monetary, okay? So for the seller considering to sell their property to you, you're going to put down a deposit, and that's that earnest money deposit. So $500 in earnest money and blank as option fee. So what is option fee? Your option fee is the money that you pay to the seller to get your inspection or option period to cancel the contract if you need to, okay? So typically your option fee is about $10 to $15 a day. We like to stick with an even $50. If you're working on the traditional retail side, I can tell you that we haven't written an option check for less than $250. The retail and the investment side is just a little different. You wanna give the seller something, but I mean, at the end of the day, we have a bottom line here. It's not like we're just purchasing our dream home. No, we're investors, right? Like we gotta make it happen, okay? So here we're gonna say that we're giving the seller $50 in option fee. So $500 in earnest money and $50 in option fee. The earnest money and option fee shall be made payable to escrow agent and may be paid separately or combined in a single payment. So before earnest money and option were separated, you have to write 2 different checks. Potentially you could send a wire to the title company and cut a check for the seller. Now you can send all the money to the title company and the title company will receive out the option and the earnest money, which is really nice because it holds all parties accountable. Section 5, Part B, termination option. for nominal consideration, the receipt of which seller acknowledges. So the seller agrees to this, and the buyer also agrees to pay the payment for the option within the time required. Okay, the seller grants the buyer the unrestricted right to terminate this contract by giving notice of termination to the seller within blank days after the effective date of this contract. Option period. Notices under this paragraph must be given by 5 p.m. local time where the property is located by the date specified. If buyer gives notice of termination within the time prescribed, 1, the option fee will not be refunded and escrow agent shall release any option fee remaining with escrow agent to seller. And 2, any earnest money will be refunded to buyer. Okay, so what does all this mean? For consideration for the $50, the seller agrees to our option period. Okay, and they give us the unrestricted right to terminate this contract by giving them a notice of termination. So we're going to send them that termination of contract within blank days. So we definitely want a minimum of a 10-day option period. What this option period does, it gets you the property under contract, and then you're going to start marketing the property, and then you're going to start getting people interested in the property, and then you're going to start getting bids on the property and potentially hosting a showing, and then you're either going to assign the property or double close. But either way, you've got your end buyer locked up for this contract within this option period. That way, if you possibly acquired the property at too high of a price, you can terminate the contract and get your earnest money back because the seller gave you the unrestricted right to terminate the contract and get your earnest money back. Typically, we want to get a 10 to 14 day option period. The more, the better. Here, we're going to say we have 21 days in option. Okay. So we can cancel this contract anytime within the 21 days. And if it hits the 21st day, you have to send the termination by 5 p.m. local time where the property is located. Otherwise, you're locked in, and it's going to be much more challenging to get that earnest money back, if at all. So if you send the termination within the prescribed amount of time, then the agent will release your earnest money back to you. Okay, section 6, title policy and survey. A, title policy. Seller shall furnish to buyer at whose expense, who's paying for the title policy. Okay, buyer or seller, you pick one. So seller shall furnish to buyer at buyer's expense an owner policy of the title insurance. Title policy issued by Patent Title, which is the title company that you chose, and the amount of the sales price dated at or after closing, insuring the buyer against the loss of the provisions of the title policy. Basically, what this is saying, that you're going to use a title company and that you're going to get a title commitment saying that there are no liens on this property and that nobody can come back to this property claiming that it's theirs. Okay. So one thing about title insurance that's different than any other insurance that I know of actually is title insurance protects the past. Your car insurance, your homeowner's insurance, your renter's insurance, your health insurance, all of that protects you in the future. Title insurance protects the past. So you would choose who is paying for the title policy. Normally it's the buyer, normally it's the investor. Okay, so you'd have that checked. And then in section 8, go ahead and make sure that first box is checked. All right. And then we're going to be talking about the survey. Again, who is paying for the survey? So section C, survey. The survey must be made by a registered professional land surveyor acceptable to the title company and buyer's lenders. 1. Within 10 days after the effective date of the contract, seller shall furnish to buyer and title company seller's existing survey of the property and a residential real property affidavit promulgated by the Texas Department of Insurance, a T-47 affidavit. If seller fails to furnish the existing survey or affidavit within the time prescribed, buyer shall obtain a new survey at seller's expense no later than 3 days prior to closing date. If the existing survey or affidavit is not acceptable by the title company or buyer's lenders, buyer shall obtain a new survey at buyer's expense no later than 3 days prior to closing. So what this says is if the seller has the survey and or T-47 affidavit, they can submit it to the title company. If the title company and or your lender and or your investor's lender accepts this survey, then you're good to go. If the lender and or the title company does not accept the survey, then at the buyer's expense, the buyer would be able to obtain the survey. Okay, so we just went over our contracted sales price, our earnest money option. Something that I didn't go over was title that I wanted to mention. So when you're working with title companies, especially as a wholesaler, you want to make sure that you're working with an investor-friendly title company. So I would recommend getting some references, getting some referrals, calling around to different title companies, asking if they're investor-friendly, asking how they handle double closes, asking how they handle assignments, if they have a cap on their assignment fee. If you're doing a double close, do you need transactional funding, or are they able to do pass-through funding? These are all questions that you want to ask your title company. Oh, also ask them, hey, as a wholesaler, if something comes up in title, who's the first person you reach out to? If they say the seller or the buyer, you've got an issue. No. You need them to reach out to you first, because your job as a wholesaler is to keep the equilibrium between the buyer and the seller all good and make sure that nothing goes crazy, right? So you want to make sure that the title company is reaching out to you and that you're their main point of contact for this transaction. So yes, beautiful. I think that covers the slide. So who's paying for the title policy and who's paying for the survey? All of these are negotiable items in the contract, of course, but generally you as a wholesaler or you as the investor are going to be eating these fees. Next thing that we're going to look at is the HOA. So section E, part 2, is the property subject to an HOA? The property is or is not subject to a mandatory membership in a property owners association. So what you can do is you can look up the home to see if it's in an HOA. You can also ask the seller, of course, or a previous listing to find out if that neighborhood is in an HOA. So if the property is in an HOA, then you're going to add an HOA addendum onto the contract, and we'll cover that in just a little bit. But if it's not, then you're good to go. All right, so we're going to look at some timeline terms in the contract, like the property condition, the closing date, and when we're going to get possession of the property. So section 7, property condition. Part B, seller's disclosure notice. So the seller's disclosure notice is a document that the seller fills out, and it basically tells us everything that they know about the property. So 1, the buyer has received that seller's disclosure notice. You could possibly check that if you have received it already. Likelihood is that you've not. 2, buyer has not received the notice within 3 days after the effective date of this contract. Seller shall deliver the notice to buyer. If buyer does not receive the notice, buyer may terminate this contract at any time prior to the closing, and the earnest money will be refunded to buyer. If seller delivers the notice, buyer may terminate this contract for any reason within 7 days after buyer receives the notice or prior to the closing, whichever occurs first, and the earnest money will be refunded to buyer. Again, this part of the contract is negotiable, but you want to give the seller 3 days to give you their seller's disclosure notice. So you sign the contract, and 3 days later, the seller should have their disclosure notice back to you. Along with the property condition, we're also going to look at the acceptance. acceptance of the property as is means that the present condition of the property with any and all defects and without warranty, except for the warranties of title and the warranties in this contract, buyer's agreement to accept the property as is under the paragraph 7D1 or 2 does not preclude buyer from inspecting the property under paragraph 7A from negotiating repairs or treatments in a subsequent amendment or from terminating this contract during option period, if any. So the buyer accepts the property as is, or 2, buyer accepts the property as is, provided seller at seller's expense shall complete the following specific repairs and treatments. But generally you're going to select 1, the buyer accepts the property as is. And what this section is saying right here is that even though the buyer accepts the property as is, they are still allowed to get an inspection and they're allowed to renegotiate repairs or treatments in another amendment. So just because that's what it says here, you can amend this, okay, in an amendment. So we talked about property condition. We're accepting the property as is. And we're going to skip number 8 for now. We'll come back to it in a minute. We're going to jump down to number 9, closing. A, the closing of the sale will be on or before blank of 2020, whatever the year is, okay? Or within 7 days after objections made under paragraph 6D have been cured or waived, whichever date is later. If either party fails to close the sale by the closing date, the non-defaulting party may exercise the remedies contained in paragraph 15. And in paragraph 15, basically it says that the buyer or seller can sue for specific performance. And then, then some other legal battles might come up, but that's another topic. So here we're going to enter the closing date. And the closing date is normally for wholesalers about 14 to 21 days after the effective date of the contract. But again, this is a negotiable thing, and we also tell the sellers that they pick their closing date. So if 2 to 3 weeks is way too early for them, then maybe we need to push it out a little further. Section 10, possession. Buyer's possession. Seller shall deliver to buyer possession of the property in its present or required condition, ordinary wear and tear expected. 1, upon closing and funding, or 2, according to a temporary residential lease from the promulgated TREC or other written lease agreement. So basically what this tells you is when you're going to get the keys to the property, okay? If seller will be out of the home prior to the date of closing, select closing and funding, okay? So the first box. If they're staying in the property for a period of time after closing, then draft a seller's temporary residential lease-back, okay? You can work these lease-backs a couple different ways. The way that we typically structure them are like this. We'll either take the seller's mortgage amount and divide it by 30 days, and that's their prorated daily amount for rent, or we'll take the market rent amount and divide it by 30 days, and then that's their prorated rent amount. Just depends on what works best for the given situation. Also note here that a temporary residential leaseback is a max of 90 days. Okay, so the max amount of time that you could possibly give the seller in this situation is 3 months to stay in the property. And at that point, you can have the seller write a check for you at closing with all 3 months in advance, or potentially the first month and a half. Or you can hold a specific amount of proceeds in escrow after the property is closed, pretty much tying up the seller's money until they're out of the property. So we went over property condition. We're buying the property as is. We've got our closing date, and we know when we're getting the keys to the property at closing, or are we doing a residential lease back? Now let's talk about special provisions and disclosures. Okay, we're going to jump back up here to number 8, brokers and sales agents. Brokers or sales agents disclosure. Texas law requires a real estate broker or sales agent who is a party to a transaction or acting on behalf of a spouse, parent, child, a business entity, in which the broker or sales agent owns more than 10%, or a trust for which the broker or sales agent acts as a trustee, or the broker or sales agent's spouse, parent, or child is a beneficiary, to notify the other party in writing before entering into a contract of sale. Disclosure if applicable. Okay, so basically, if you're a real estate agent or a broker, you have to make it known. And if you have any relation to anybody or have anything to do with any part of this transaction, you have to disclose it. Okay, so here I would say Alexis Skeen is a licensed realtor in the state of Texas and is a majority owner of Gypsy Endeavors LLC. That would be my disclosure. All right, so that's number 8. And then in special provisions, let's make something clear. If you're a licensed agent, put it here again. Make sure that you double check yourself, okay? Another thing about special provisions is this is not an area where you can change any part of the contract that is not supposed to be changed. You are not a lawyer. You cannot practice real estate law. Special provisions. Insert only factual statements and business details applicable to the sale. TREC rules prohibit license holders from adding factual statements or business details for which a contract, addendum, or lease or other form has been promulgated by TREC for mandatory use. So if there's another form for it, use it. Okay, if you're buying a piece of land and there's a mobile home on it, guess what? That mobile home is not real estate. It's personal property. So you're gonna have to use an addendum for that mobile home, or you can sell it outside of the contract. There's a couple different ways to do it. Just know that mobile homes aren't real property, okay? So our special provision states this. Buyer holds an active real estate license in the state of Texas. Buyer is purchasing the property as an investment with the intent to profit from the transaction. Buyer does not represent the seller in this transaction. Seller's sole remedy if buyer defaults is limited to earnest money. So if we default with the contract, all they've got is their earnest money, okay? Paragraph 12 through 20, you can go ahead and read through on your own. So now we're gonna add everybody's contact information for notices and all the addenda that go along with the contract. All right, so notices, we're gonna add our contact information, okay, our name, our phone number, our email, and then we're gonna add the seller's name, phone number, and email, and make sure that you fill all that information out. So if title needs to, they can just reference back to the contract and reach out to the seller. In section 22, we're checking off all the addenda that we're gonna add onto this contract. There's quite a few different addenda items that are pre-filled here. We're gonna go over the 3 most common. Is the property located in a homeowners association? If we said yes, then again, we would check this box here and then add the HOA addenda. If the seller needs a temporary residential lease-back, then we would again select the lease-back here and then add the lease-back. If the property was built before 1978 in the state of Texas, you have to have a lead-based paint addenda. Basically saying that lead in 1978 prior was made with lead and it may or may not have lead in it. We don't know. We just have to make the disclosure. So 1978 and prior, you need that addenda. So you've got everybody's contact information and all that addenda added onto the contract. Now it's time to sign. The buyer and seller are both going to sign the contract, and whoever is the last to sign is going to fill in the execution date. This should be you. Always make sure that the seller signs first, okay? And then you fill in the execution date. So it would read on the, for instance, on the 15th day of October, 2021, this contract was executed. So you take the contract then, and then you send it everything into the title company. You send the contract, you send the option fee and the earnest money, whether you send them in one check or two, into the title company. And what they're going to do is they're going to receipt your option fee. They're going to receipt your earnest money. They're also going to receipt that they have received this contract so that they can open title and start pulling a title search. We're going to check out the two main seller's disclosures that you're going to see in Texas and how to use them. This is the Texas Association of Realtor Sellers Disclosure, and this seller's disclosure is much more in depth than the TREC disclosure. So basically what you're going to do is send this to the seller, and you're going to fill out the property address at the top. The seller is going to tell you if or if not they're occupying the property, how long they've lived in the property, and or if they've never lived in the property. All right. And then they're going to go through each one of these items and select yes, no, or unknown. So for instance, does the property have central AC? Yes, no, or unknown. If it's yes, is it gas or electric? How many units does it have? So they're going to go through all 6 of these pages and fill out everything that they know about the property. And then the seller is going to initial each page, and then the buyer is going to initial each page. So that's the Texas Association of Realtors, and this is the TREC Seller's Disclosure Notice. It is pretty similar. It's just not as in-depth, and most investors and most buyers like to see the other's disclosure notice. If I were you, I would lean toward using the Texas Association of Realtors Sellers Disclosure Notice. If you have a TREC SD, that's fine, but I would recommend using the TAR. All right, HOA Addendum. In Chapter 6, Title Policy, Section E, Part 2, Membership in Property Owners Association. If the property is located in a homeowners association, then we need to get an HOA addendum. It'll look something like this. You'll start by filling out the property address, and then if you've got the homeowners association name and their phone number, you'd fill it out here. Generally, we have box 4 selected. The buyer does not require delivery of the subdivision information. Generally, we can get that from the title company or directly from the seller. Buyer does not require delivery of the subdivision information. That's what we have selected. It just makes our job as wholesalers easier. If the investor really needs it, then of course, then the title company and the seller would get involved, and we would get that information over to them. In Section C, fees, except as provided by paragraphs A, D, and E, buyer shall pay any and all association fees or other charges associated with the transfer of the property not to exceed $250, and seller shall pay any in excess. So basically saying that the buyer will pay up to $250 to transfer the HOA fees over it if they have to. And then the seller will pay for everything else. And then the buyer and seller would agree to this. Please go through and read each one of these documents in depth. That scared me. I am not going to bore you with sitting here and reading them all line by line to you, but please take the time and do that. Like I mentioned earlier, if the property was built before 1978, we would need a lead-based paint addendum. So we would check this box here and then open up our lead-based paint addendum. Again, putting our property address at the top. Generally, the seller is going to select B. The seller has no records pertaining to lead-based paint and or lead-based paint hazards in the property. And then on section C, I would put 1, buyer waives the opportunity to conduct a risk assessment or inspection of the property for the presence of lead-based paint or lead-based paint hazards. I don't know anybody that has tested for lead-based paint. I would waive that right, okay? Section D, I would select 1, buyer has received copies of all information listed above. And then the buyer and seller would both sign this agreement, okay? Basically saying that, hey, yeah, if the property was built before 1978, we know that there might be a possibility of lead-based paint, but all right, we know it's just a legality that we have to mention and a document that we have to track. So here we go, really not that big of a deal. Now let's pretend like we made a whoopsie and we have to amend the contract. We have to change something in the contract. We would pull up an amendment of contract, and let's just say section 1 is regarding the sales price of the home. If we need to change our sales price, then we could change it here. Section 2, in addition to any repairs and treatments otherwise required by the contract, seller at seller's expense shall complete the following repairs and treatments. So if we need to renegotiate repairs with the seller, we could do this here. The date in paragraph 9 of the contract is changed too. So you can change the date, the closing date of the contract. 6 is if you need to extend your option period with the seller. You can give an additional option fee and then change your option date. And then if you need to modify anything else in the contract that does not deem you practicing law, you can enter it here in section 9 in other modifications. And then the buyer and the seller would both sign this amendment, and then the last person to sign would fill in the execution date. So, potentially we locked up a property at too high of an acquisition price, or maybe there's a cloud on title and it's non-transferable, or potentially we acquired it too high and now we have to terminate the property. How do we do that, and how do we get our earnest money back? We're going to start by sending a release of earnest money. So you'd fill in the property address. And then in section B, it says the escrow agent is to disperse the earnest money as follows. So if you put $500 in earnest money, like our example contract said, you'd put $500 to Gypsy Endeavors LLC, the person who paid the earnest money, okay? And then the buyer and the seller would sign it, and the title company would release your earnest money. And we were able to get our earnest money released because we submitted our termination of contract within our option period. So you would fill in the street address, you would fill in the buyer and seller's information, and then you would select why you're terminating the property. So the most common reason is for number 1, the unrestricted right of the buyer to terminate the contract. So generally you're going to select section 1, or if that doesn't pertain to you, maybe one of these other options do. So go ahead and read through all of those. So for this, the seller does not have to sign this one. Actually, the buyer has to sign it and then send it to the seller. So you've sent the termination of contract to the seller and to the title company. And at the same time, you sent the release of earnest money to the title company. So they're starting to get all of this paperwork together and get you your earnest money back. But guess what? We're not going to have that issue because we're going to get good properties under contract. And because we're going to get good properties under contract, we want to protect our interests. So we're going to file an affidavit of memorandum. Basically, what this affidavit is saying is that you have equitable interest in this property. So what you're going to do is you're going to take this document, get it notarized, take this and the original contract and file it with the county clerk. And you're going to pay the little fee to file it with the clerk. Then you're going to get a receipt. And from there, you've got an affidavit of memorandum on the property. So that if anybody tries to daisy chain this deal from underneath you or sweep it out from underneath you, when they go to purchase the property and the title company pulls the title search, they're going to see that there's a cloud on the title because of your memorandum on the property. So if anybody tries to purchase this property from the seller, if the seller goes into contract with another investor, God forbid, you have now clouded the title for this property. And now the title company has to come ask you what you want to do. And at that point, a couple things can happen. If it goes into all that, then wow, something went crazy in this transaction in the first place. So there might be some other issues. And at that point, contact your team and y'all can figure it out from there. So what you're gonna do is start by filling out this affidavit. And the state of Texas and the county of blank before me, the undersigned authority on this day personally appeared. So basically saying that I, Alexis Skeen of Gypsy Endeavors, swear that I have a purchase and sale agreement for the property described. So you would enter in the legal description and property address. So you entered into an agreement with you as a buyer, and then you'd put in the seller's name on whatever executed date the contract says. You're telling them who you entered into a contract with and when you entered into the agreement with them. A copy of the purchase and sale agreement can be obtained by contacting, here you would put your information, okay? Your mailing address and your telephone number. Also with this, I would highly recommend that you record the contract with the city anyway. Yes, they can obtain it by contacting you, but it would be much more beneficial if the city already had it on file, okay? And then you would take this document to the county clerk's office, and you can Google Houston County Clerk or Conroe County Clerk, and the address will pop up for you. So just take these documents in there. So we've got our affidavit filed, and we're starting to market the property and get investors involved. And woohoo, we got an awesome bid and we selected this investor. And now we're going to assign the contract. If we were going to double close, then we would just use the TREC contract again and just fill out the buyer's information and change the sales price and a couple different terms in the contract. But if we're assigning the contract, then we're going to use this assignment. So you'd fill in the date that you are entering into this agreement with the assignor, which is you. You are the assignor because you own the contract. And the assignee is the investor. Okay, so between Gypsy Endeavors LLC and the assignee, regarding the property described as, and then you would enter in the legal description and the property address again. Whereas the assigner as buyer entered into a purchase and sale agreement with the seller. So here you would put the original seller's name. So the name that's on the deed of the property right now. So you entered into an agreement with the seller for the purchase of the subject property for the amount of blank. So you purchased the property from the seller for $100,000. Whereas a signer wishes to assign the rights and interest in the purchase and sale agreement, a signer and assignee hereby follows. Okay. The assignment fee. Assignee shall pay assignor an assignment fee in the amount of, so let's just say that we assigned it for $110,000. We would say $10,000, which shall be collected on the settlement statement. So the title company is actually going to be the person who pays the wholesaler, also the person that disperses the money to the seller and takes it from the investor. So section 2, subject property purchase price plus assignment fee to equal $110,000. The assignment fee is not earned if the purchase of the subject property does not close if title cannot be transferred. So basically saying that if the property does not close, then you're not going to get your assignment fee. You're not just going to get $10,000 from up out of nowhere, right? The seller has to get their funds and the buyer has to close on the property. Section 3 is the termination period. If you as the assignor want to give the assignee, your investor, a termination period, you can give this to them there. You can enter in the amount of days that you're going to give them for option. I normally don't give my investors option periods at all unless they're potentially an out-of-state investor or I've got a property that's, in Timbuktu and they just couldn't get out there. They're having a hard time getting their cruise. Maybe, but generally I would not give an option period to an investor. If an investor is asking for an option period, That normally tells me they're a wholesaler. Not always, but normally. And then like how you had to put the earnest money up for the seller, your investor is going to put a deposit in with you. So the assignee, the investor, will deposit. How much is your deposit? As a wholesaler, I tell investors I need to say $3,500. Show me you've got $3,500 ready to put up for this contract, that you're a serious investor and that you're not going to yank my chain and pull out of this deal. 3,500, you're solid. Let's get to work. Okay. So the investor will deposit $3,500 of earnest money with the title company to be held in escrow. And that deposit does go towards the sales price of the contract. If the seller's purchasing it for $110,000, if they give a $3,000 assignment fee for easy numbers, then at closing, the buyer would bring $107,000 to the closing table because they've already paid $3,000 and that $3,000 is sitting in escrow. Okay. And then the closing date is going to be the same that's on the contract with the seller. And then there's some more verbiage here that you can go ahead and read over on your own time. You're going to print your name, sign, and date. And then the investor is going to print their name, sign, and date, and then add their contact information as well. All right, we're going to briefly go over joint venture agreements. And when you use a joint venture agreement, typically it's when you've acquired a property and you need help disposing it, or somebody else has acquired a property and you're helping them dispose it. So it's to protect all parties' interest in marketing the property. All right, so this marketing agreement went into effect on blank date between Gypsy Endeavors and blank associate. All right. You're going to fill out the property address and legal description for the property that you're referencing. In section 2.3, you can change the commission amount for the JV agreement. Okay. So for right here, it says 42.5. This can say 20. This can say 50. Whatever your partnership agreement has decided. Maybe you're doing a 70-30 split or a 60-40 split or a 50-50 split. Whatever that says, you can make this known right here. Okay. Right here, it says 42.5%. Well, 42.5% of what? Well, 42.5% of your RIP, of your take home. Okay. Your contracted sales price with the seller and what you sold it for to the investor. What's that difference? If you're JVing the property, well, you might have to pay out half of that to your partner, right? So please, again, take your time, read through the document. Just know that this is a document that you use for a marketing agreement with another investor, with another partner. In the Google Drive, you're going to find examples of common documents found in title in the closing process. So the buyer and seller intake form, which basically tells the title company everything they need to know about the buyer and seller. And then you're going to get the title commitment. So after you lock up the property and you send in the contract to the title company with your earnest money and option, continue to follow up with the title company and get the title commitment. What this is going to tell you if the title is clear or not, or if the property has a cloud on title. If there's clouds on title, maybe we can get these issues removed, or maybe the property is just too far gone and there's a whole lot of issues with title and it's just not transferable. Okay. So we need to get that title commitment back. I've also provided you with an example of an inspection report. Take your time, read through this report. If you have any questions, reach out. I've given you an example of a wire authorization report. This is the one document that I look forward to filling out because that's how I know I'm closer to getting paid. Like it's almost real. Title company is getting everything prepped for closing and they're wanting to know how to fund my check. So I am really happy when I see title reaching out with a wire authorization form. I've also provided an elevation certificate and an example of a survey. The elevation certificate will tell you a couple things to include if the property is located in any special flood hazards and what the elevation of the property is. The survey will tell you a couple things. Are there any encroachments? Can you build on the property? If so, are there any easements on the property? You know, it'll pretty much tell you everything that you need to know about that specific piece of land. So again, all of these documents are located in the Google Drive. The elevation certificate, the survey, the inspection report, the title commitment, the seller intake form, and the wire authorization form are all here for you to review, look over, and definitely reach out if you have any questions. But now it's your turn. What you're gonna do is you're gonna pick an address, any address. It can be your address, it can be your family's address, it can be your friend's address, it can be a random address, okay? Choose an address, and I want you to pretend like a new lead came in. You're gonna run the ARV, estimate what it would cost to bring this property up to top market value. Okay, so how much is it gonna cost in rehab? And then what is your offer range? As a wholesaler, your offer range is typically somewhere between 70% of ARV minus repairs to about 75% of ARV minus repairs. Okay, so what's your offer range? And then what we're gonna do is pretend like we're going on an appointment with the seller. All right, so we've analyzed all these numbers and the seller said, yes, let's go ahead and set an appointment. You can come out to the property and you can analyze it. But before we go out to the property, we want to fill out our contract and make sure that we have all of our ducks in a row so that when we get to the property, we've got our electronic copy and our paper copy. Going back to the lead that we just picked, we're gonna pull up the county appraisal district, fill out the contract, add all the addendas that are needed for this specific property. And then in our next conversation, we're going to review the contract that you filled out and walk through this entire process. I know this was a brief description of a whole lot of admin and a whole lot of documentation. I promise we'll get much better with them. Please do yourself a favor and read through all these documents line by line to really make sure that you understand what not only the seller is signing, but what you're signing as well, because you are also entering into these contracts and you need to make sure that you completely understand them. All right, guys, I will talk to you soon. Thank you so much. Mwah.